who is unable to join us at this time. Okay, so wonderful. We're going to talk about the state of US recycling and the recent EPA infrastructure report. So in order to go through this topic, we'll give some context and background on this EPA infrastructure report. It was put out in August of 2024. Talk a little bit about the current state of US recycling, what it'll cost to modernize and what in fact modernization means to us, and then what future solutions might look like in order to modernize. So starting out, what does modernization actually mean? So this report was actually created by the EPA at the behest of Congress. They gave them the mandate of saying, what would it take to modernize the material recovery infrastructure in the United States? And so the EPA took this direction and sort of broke it up into three pieces. One is they defined a thing called equivalent access to recycling. They thought that was important. We'll talk about what that means. They wanted to focus on improving consumer recycling education. We'll talk about those investments and why that's important. And then they pulled together resources to try to understand what the investment cost in our recycling infrastructure in the United States was actually going to be needed. So let's start with, it's probably worth noting, the picture on the right is actually my local recycling center out here. I'm located in the Bay Area. And these materials are ready to be recycled. Unfortunately, only half of them will be recycled. And so we'll talk a little bit in this report why we see numbers like that and what's so challenging about this problem. So maybe to set a baseline, we should talk about the current recycling rate. This is estimated to be 32%. That's where we're at. In 2019, the EPA set a national recycling goal of 50%. So we have a long ways to go, but at least we have a stake in the sand. This is a goal of 50% by 2030. That's coming up real fast, and there are lots of challenges ahead, as we'll see. But it's notable that we do have a stake in the sand, and that's actually quite helpful, because that 50% is actually the way that the EPA is assessing whether modernizing the recycling system will help us achieve that 50% goal. And as we'll see, it does. So great, we have some steps we can take to take action. So first, let's start off with what equivalent access means. So to the EPA, they defined this as recycling access on par with trash. So if a home has their trash picked up at the curb, then EPA is saying they should also have their recycling picked up at the curb. So where are we right now? Well, for 40% of US households, they don't have access to this curbside recycling system. They have to go drop off, or they have no access at all. And this is for packaging recycling. On the organic side, being yard waste or even home food waste, that is an even more challenging number. Only 91% or 9% have access to organics recycling, leaving many people unserved. It's also worth noting what packaging recycling means to the EPA. So they defined household packaging recycling as material that is widely available to be recycled, and where the technology to do that recycling is well understood and scalable. So what this means is actually that only types 1 and 2 of plastic are actually considered to be recyclable by the EPA in general, but also for the purposes of this report. So as a note, if you're not aware, plastics number 1 is typically used for water bottles. Plastics number 2 are typically used for milk jugs, laundry detergent bottles, things like that. So this leaves 3 through 7 plastics as basically not recyclable. Either the technology is not at scale or it's not available broadly enough. So again, just where are we at with equivalent access? We are trying to provide access to these 60% of 40% of households lacking packaging recycling and 91% lacking organics recycling. So next we'll talk about improving consumer recycling education. So if we take, again, my local recycling facilities pile of recycling here, a bunch of that isn't actually recyclable. There's lots of 3 through 7 plastics in there. And in fact, not only that, but what is accepted and able to be recycled by my recycling provider is definitely not consistent across the United States. So there are lots of source contamination challenges when we talk about getting consumers to understand what can be recycled and how to recycle it. Some common ones are that you should actually never put your recyclables in a plastic bag. Those plastic bags are actually called tanglers by the recycling industry. My co-founder Cassie here had a really fun little Instagram post about what the problem was with that and why that doesn't work for recycling facilities. But it's a huge problem. Lots of people are unaware of this. There are lots of investments in education needed. There's also challenges of food residue and just basic infrastructure investment cost. So what you'll see as we talk further is that there's a range of investment needed when the EPA has provided this report. And this is because there's a range of approaches that you could take to modernizing the infrastructure. You could do more low tech or go higher tech with optics and robotics and other modern technologies being applied to recycling, and that those investments will help us reduce contamination. But the most effective way, we think, in order to do that is to improve education at the source in people's homes, helping them better understand that. So what we really need is universally consistent and accessible recycling education in people's native languages in ways that they're really going to understand. So there's a big investment needed here to improve that source separation. Source contamination rates and reduce them. And so finally, the infrastructure investment cost. How much is it going to cost to actually modernize, get access to the equivalent, and improve education and improve the infrastructure itself? As I mentioned, applying technology in those material recovery facilities. So let's talk a little bit about what does it mean when we're talking about the recycling infrastructure in the United States. So we can start here at the generation phase up at the top. So that is where we are generating waste at our homes, in commercial businesses, in institutions. There are some differences between the data availability, and in fact, data availability is a huge challenge and it's different between how data is collected for recycling facilities versus how they're collected for organics facilities. But I'm going to maybe for the purpose of this conversation, just talk about generation as a whole. But we have varying quality of data for each. And so if you want to really dig into the specifics, it's going to vary by packaging material versus organics. So generation infrastructure, we talked about education needed. Collection, and then actually the recycling sort of piece of this. So there's what infrastructure is there? There's the bins that people use to put the recycling out at the curb. There's the essentially dumpsters or drop boxes that people use if they live in a place with drop-off access, which will, just as a little diversion, which will be a solution for less dense areas indefinitely. There are definitely always going to be places where curbside access doesn't make sense. So different types of investments are still going to be needed for different regions, different areas across the United States. Investments in transfer stations, which is where, if you've ever seen, actually that picture here is my recycling facility's transfer station. So these materials came in on the trucks, they were dropped off, they were tipped onto what's called the tipping floor, and then they will be put into the different robotics and non-robotic sorters to pull out the different materials to be recycled. So investments in infrastructure there are needed, as well as there are some numbers put forth in the report about just how many of these infrastructure facilities exist. There's not nearly enough to meet our needs. They're also dispersed at different locations throughout the United States. So some areas where the EPA noted that there could be further investment because of higher population density and lower recycling infrastructure. They noted the Southeast, the Southwest, and I forget the name of that portion of the country, and it's the central area. And so there's some regional investments in just creating these from what doesn't exist right now. And then there's a big part of the gap across our infrastructure is around end markets. Who is actually going to offtake the products of the anaerobic digestion? Who is actually going to use these recycled materials in the production of products? And so market development is another huge area for potential investment. Without there being markets for these materials, the value is going to continue to stay low, and we're not going to be able to, and that market development investment was another key area of gaps that the EPA identified. So boiling it all down, like at the end of the day, what is this all going to cost? So the range of investment is $36 to $43 billion needed. And that would be getting us well past the 50% recycling rate that is the national goal, and getting us up to 61%. So that'd be amazing. The range, as I mentioned, just depends on how much technology is invested in. There's a low end of technology investment and a high end there. And then it's worth noting the difference in amount of money needed for investing in packaging material versus organic waste. Alone, neither of these investments will actually get us to that 61%. If we only invested in packaging material infrastructure, we'd get to about 47%. If we only invested in organic waste, we'd also get to about 47%. So we really need both of them together to achieve this and exceed our national recycling rate goal. And in order to do this, where is the money going to come from? This is another big, piece that the report was trying to share. So there are, these are probably well understood funding sources, but the report was giving a few examples of where these different funding sources were successful. So in terms of government financing, government grants, the bipartisan infrastructure law gave out millions in grants to solid waste infrastructure. Swiffer grants is what they're called. And there's also national grants to support the national recycling strategy. And there are a number of opportunities there, some of which have already been dispersed and some of which are still in process. The report also gave several examples of private sector and public-private partnerships. Some examples of private sector investments are WM Waste Management, which is one of the largest trash companies in the country, investing $800 million over 3 years to invest in their recycling infrastructure. Another large recycling company, Republic Services, has been investing in what they're calling polymer centers to recycle more of that type 1 plastic. They launched a polymer center in Las Vegas last year, and are building one out in Indiana, I believe this year. I don't know the launch date for that one. But what they're basically trying to do is recover more of that valuable PET, that valuable type 1 plastic, from what they would otherwise be sending to landfills, because these large trash companies, be frank, they have some mixed incentives. They are paid to get the trash and recyclables from people who are paying them for this service. And then they are trying to, make the right trade-offs in terms of their own infrastructure investments to figure out what recyclables they can then turn around and sell and get value from. So those are these two large trash companies are themselves making private sector investments in recycling. And, that's going to be one of the pieces to this puzzle. Another piece of the puzzle is fee-based programs. So there are often what are referred to as tipping fees. So basically a surcharge on the cost that you pay to put material into landfill in order to subsidize some of the cost of recycling, and then also to provide some feedback to consumers, to people who are putting material in landfills, that there are more costs than just digging the hole and putting the material in the ground when you are putting material in landfills. And so that's meant to really incentivize more mindful use of reduction and mindful use of materials. So what else for recycling? So we talked about the 3 pieces of modernizing recycling in the US, making sure we have equivalent access, improving consumer education, and investing in basic, not basic, but investing in the infrastructure needed to process all of this and make this circular economy work. That recycling goal, as I mentioned, is a goal for 2030. So as we look beyond 2030, hopefully start to make some of these improvements, the EPA was definitely noting that we need to think beyond just the packaging materials and organics. Definitely electronics recycling is becoming more and more of a focus area. Textile recycling, I think many of us have seen the images of textiles being poorly managed and the impact that has on the world. And then looking at what plastics recycling could look like beyond plastics number three through seven, beyond one and two, taking on three through seven. So there is a lot of research and innovation and attention on improving these recycling of those plastics. They're not at scale yet to a point where the EPA could say that it is a measurable part of the solution. So definitely looking forward to new materials. Also, more policy initiatives are going to be needed. So more incentives for using recycled material on procurement teams. At least under the Biden administration, there were some guidelines around and focus on using recycled content in materials that were being procured. The U.S. government is one of the biggest buyers in the U.S., so that actually has a lot of sway. So hopefully seeing at least some of that continue. The EPR legislation is another tool which is becoming more and more popular among states. If you're not familiar with the term, extended producer responsibility is what that stands for. And the idea is putting more of responsibility on the producers of these packaging materials in particular to help appropriately manage them at the end of life and help fund some of these infrastructure investments. And then, of course, there's also new technologies that can be applied to improve the efficiency of the recovery facilities that we already have, the efficiency of new recovery facilities, to improve optical sortation, robotics, and then, platforms like resins, which are tech-driven ways using proven technology to improve the recycling rates and recover more material from the public. So I'll actually just take just a minute to talk a little bit about Resin's tech-driven platform and what we're offering. So we build fully automated drop-off recycling stations where we pay users for bringing us their recycling. So a big part of, I didn't even mention, the recycling rates, especially of packaging materials, are highest in states that offer incentives for recycling. You might have heard them referred to as bottle bills. A language also used is deposit return systems. And so when there is a financial incentive to recycle, people do it more. Resin we had a pilot station in Effingham in South Central Illinois last year, and we provided incentives to customers, 1 cent per item, and we were able to collect 176,000 aluminum cans over the course of 7 months. It's enough aluminum for a small Cessna. So aligning incentives, helping people see that their recycling is having an impact is a way that we can change behavior and contribute to that recycling education that the EPA was stating was so important. So just on the screen here, we've got what our recycling stations look like. It's a converted 20-foot shipping container, fits into a parking lot. Our platform is a great tool to use for community groups, campuses, colleges to fundraise. And then I just like the visual of all of the cans that we collected because it was really cool to see a 40-foot shipping container plus filled, not shipping container, it was a semi-trailer, but see it all filled to the brim with aluminum cans. So we were able to see recycling turning into impact. And so we are excited to bring more people sort of into our fold and realize this vision. The community was also really excited. Emily Hilly of United Way was a big supporter of us. They were one of our first fundraisers. They really, found the program to be seamless. And then, it's tech enabled, it's tech enhanced. The tech doesn't get in the way. It makes the automated experience as easy and smooth as possible. People are using this type of technology in the day to day. And so it really was able to have a big impact in Effingham. And so I really appreciate everyone who has taken the time to join us as we did this little whirlwind tour of the recent EPA Infrastructure Report. That's really all I had to share with you. Those are the key takeaways that I took away from the report. You see us here with some of our community supporters in Effingham. We're looking for more community supporters. We hope you'll join us in building a sustainable future. Reach out to us, Kelly at resinrecyclables.com, Cassie at resinrecyclables.com. If you want to learn more about resin, talk more about the EPA infrastructure report, or really anything, we're looking to connect. And just check. I don't know, Kathy, if you saw any questions that people wanted answered live. Otherwise, we can always take things offline.
I'm not seeing any questions. Thank you for everybody who's sending love. It seems like people enjoyed the talk. We're really glad that you came.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day.